It's an interesting it's an interesting topic to share about because it feels really alive, like really, really visceral, very tangible in my life at the moment. To where my body is reacting to things that I'm experiencing and that I'm seeing in community. And the reason that I want to speak about this is also that I just want to process my own thoughts around it. I share everything else here, and I think it's important to share the unshiny parts, the shadowy aspects of the human experience because it's a part of it. What feels, important to state here is that I'm no authority on speaking about spiritual bypassing. I'm no authority on speaking about what integrity is and what respect is and what consent is. But what I do know is that I'm a human being that has experienced in my own spaces in connection to spiritual community a lack of respect, a lack of integrity, and behavior that I would consider to be damaging, really damaging. And so the reason that I want to speak to this is, and I don't want to say or point that this is any one community or any one person, because I'm sure that it will appear to be that way. I will speak to my personal experience without involving any names, and I will speak to how that's affected me and like what I've observed. And this is all just subjectivity on this experience because I want to open up a conversation. In the place in the most recent community where I tried to start a conversation with what I consider to be a small group of people that I wrote a statement about a specific person. My desire was not to shame or to cancel that person. My desire was to bring to light how dysfunctional and disharmonious certain withholdings of truth and behaviors were and how damaging they were to the people that were involved in the situation. And what I received back was, in a sense, like a desire to not really get involved, in the word drama coming up or shaming and an upset towards me of being violent when what I thought my communication was communication on violence. I didn't find speaking the direct truth to be violent. I really saw what I was speaking about was violent, and so it was not going to be comfortable. I wasn't writing to make a comfortable conversation come to light. I was writing to somehow maybe create a forum that we could communicate about some really uncomfortable things that were affecting all of us. And some of the statements that I received back, and the reason that I want to speak about the spiritual bypassing in culture, period, and in spiritual communities, is that it starts in small villages, right? Like when we get to fragmented behavior, when we get to larger systems that encourage us to be followers and to be quiet and to not make a ripple, it starts in small villages. It starts in small ecosystems, social ecosystems of people. And I was really saddened to be watching that kind of evolve right before my eyes in a community that I have so much respect for, so much love for, so much involvement in. And the specific person that I was calling out, I have been involved with. I have run, I'm meant to be working with in a capacity, and I have played at this person's venue and like been in close connection, with the people that I was bringing this to. And so I knew that by speaking this in some way, there was a possibility of me feeling not accepted, of feeling not heard, of feeling left behind if I were to say this and it wasn't received in the right way. And that happened. But I was prepared for that. And I checked in with myself, like, do you have the capacity to take on what could be projected at you if this doesn't go right? And I thought, I do have the capacity. And after watching this for a few years, I don't feel I can be in integrity anymore, being in friendship with this person or in collaborationship with this person, if I don't say what I'm seeing. Because at that point, I felt culpable for being in silence. And I had tried many times to be privately open and vulnerable with this person and requesting, can you please communicate with me in a different way? Can you please be respectful? Can you please not speak about things in such a manner? Can you not talk to me about your sexual relationships or loverships in the ways that you do, because it feels disrespectful to me, to the women that you're involved with? And over the past year and a half, I have made those comments to this person. I have asked them to seek help and to get therapy, or to look at the things in their past that have hurt them, that have them approaching their relationships in the way that they are. And what has happened is it's gotten to the point where there are boundaries being breached, and to the point where behavior is unethical and would be considered in many spaces to be violent, to be abusive. And we don't want to say those words in these communities because that seems violent. That seems shaming to say violence and abuse. But by definition, when you are breaching people's boundaries, when people are saying no to you around certain aspects of their body and you are not listening to that, that is breaching a boundary. That is violence. And that is considered in many ways abuse. So by speaking this into the space, it's been interesting, the feedback I've gotten. I've also gotten feedback from the women in the community that I thought may, in that moment, be sisters to both this person, but also to the women that were speaking. And that was myself, and that was another woman, and then in private, other women and men that felt that this was an issue. And what I heard back was that, you're not going to solve this by starting a war, Echo, and by being violent and starting a fight. And I felt so misunderstood in that, because I said this many times in our small group. I don't want to cancel this person. I don't want violence, but I want them to take accountability. And nobody in that conversation once said that his actions were violent when they actually are violent. Not one person used that word or a lack of integrity towards him, but they did use them towards me. I was violent for bringing this up. I was shameful for bringing this up. I was out of integrity by bringing this up in a public space, but not in one message publicly in that group did anyone say that about the very factual evidence that was listed in the group message, and that has been public before, and that has been made public by one of the women, and some of the women that have been included in the past that have said these things and had to have their own mediations and also have been, in a way, shut down. So stepping aside from that personal story, because I don't want to get into specific details, because that's not what's important here. What I want to say in community and within spiritual bypassing is to bypass a very damaging behavior or situation and putting that responsibility on someone else's own sovereignty and accountability, and on, well, that's part of life and we move through it, and don't be a victim, just, take this and grow from it. But what I don't think is fair is to put people in a situation in which they're not prepared for the lack of integrity in your actions. When you say you're going to do one thing and you do another. When you betray or you lie or you gaslight, meaning you do a poor behavior and you turn it around somehow and you blame it on that person, to me, that is mental manipulation. That is damaging. And I have experienced that in these communities, not just in this one case with this one person, but I have experienced it in my journey living in spiritual communities for the past 12 years. And the thing is I wasn't embodied enough and sovereign enough and in a place of integrity with myself living in these communities 12 years ago that I am now. Like where I am now, I can see more, I can understand more, I can also take more accountability, I can see where I'm at. And I won't lie, like there's rage coming up, there is anger coming up, because in this certain instance, I have seen this for a year and a half and I have spoken about it to this person and to other close friends and feel that it's not being spoken about. And we live in a spiritual community where we come together in a specific place that is a temple of healing, where people are coming from around the world to dance. They're coming from around the world to move through their stuff, to be surrounded by other people that desire or say that they desire to live in a different way and to be in a different way. And what I'm seeing is in some ways more damaging than what I've experienced outside conscious community. Because in this space, at least if I live in a city and someone's to do something that's unethical, I could call them out. And in some ways, without nonviolent communication, people will shame that person. And I'm not saying shame is good, but they'll at least call them out and say, you can't do that. That's not okay. But when I live in spiritual communities, what I see is we want to be love and light. We want to include everyone. We're very inclusive. We want nonviolent communication. We don't want to bring anger into the picture because we want to welcome everyone. But my experience is that if we're seeing violence and we speak to it, that doesn't mean that the language is violence. It means that we are like Kaliing. I made this term up the other day, like Kali, the goddess of destruction. Like we're calling it out, Because change is not going to happen if we just keep pacifying and become complacent with poor behavior. Then we're no different than the cities that we've left living in these communities. And by putting ourselves in a golden cage and a golden bubble, like I feel like so many spiritual communities have become like so entirely sensitive and overwhelmed to any kind of disruption that they don't have the capacity to hold space for something like this when it happens. And what I received from multiple people in the community is, I don't want to deal with this drama. I have my own things. I don't have the capacity for this. I'm exhausted. And I thought, yeah, so am I. Like, I don't want to talk about this. I have better things to do. Like, I have a really wonderful life and I've got my own darkness that I am battling and my own stories that I am trying to rewrite. Like I have other things to do than to get involved in this. But when those members of the community that are feeling that disruption and disharmony from being in connection to this person, and it happens multiple times, to me that is a pattern. And when we see a pattern so obviously, it feels to me like we have a responsibility to say something. So this is me getting involved in the conversation. And like something else that I have experienced in these communities over the years is we're preaching, one love and polyamory and openness and, really confronting your jealousy, your comparison, your story that you're not worthy, your limiting beliefs that you're not lovable, and being with that and like putting yourself in uncomfortable situations and being open in your love so that you could challenge yourself and you can grow. And I have learned so much by opening myself up to polyamory. May I say that? That's a vulnerable share. I have learned to look at my own insecurities and what used to be called jealousy, which I've experienced now. It's rare that I feel jealous, but I definitely feel upset when I'm not given the full truth. When full transparency is not there and I don't feel safe in communication with someone, something comes up, that rage, that anger. And whereas I used to think that maybe I was jealous, I realized I never really felt safe in any of my relationships. And so going into these open relationships, in the ones that were were openly transparent and honest, I learned a lot, like when I had a lover that had other lovers and they spoke to me about that love for them and they let me understand their world and how they were experiencing that person, I was given the opportunity to have a sister, in their lovers, to have a companion, um, and a friendship with these women, and that was beautiful. I've made a lot of beautiful friendships through that openness, and when it was completely transparent, what I realized is like, actually, once I felt safe because the truth was being given to me, I was more open to that openness. But the moment that downplaying came in or that information was withheld from me, I didn't feel safe anymore, and I felt that anger come up. And I've had some beautiful connections in spiritual communities that I live in, and I've also had almost some re-traumatizing experiences that started, with a modern day medicine man that I dated that, had that guru hero energy that was so attractive in the beginning because I wanted to be saved by him and lifted up by him. And he battled his own insecurities, and I can only project, but I imagine a lot of his behavior came from his insecurity of feeling like worthy, of feeling desirable, of feeling welcome because of what he went through when he was a child. And that got projected into our relationship with some really poor behavior, with a lot of lying, with a lot of deception, and a lot of unprocessed anger. And that fed into my wounding of being abandoned and not being loved and not being worthy. And that ended in me being codependent in that relationship and having this toxic trauma bond in a spiritual community, and we weren't talking about it. I didn't feel safe to talk about it with people in that community until after I was in the relationship and until years later. I didn't feel supported vocally by people in that community because I wasn't speaking my truth, and no one knew how to speak my truth for me because they didn't understand what was going on. And there was a heap of manipulation and gaslighting happening in that space. And I was small and codependent and didn't know how to communicate about it. And so now that I'm removed from that years later, like I've gone through different relationships where, I've gotten into these very loving, open relationships, and I've also gotten into these very novel, open relationships where I felt like, in connection to some of the men that I dated, there were a lot of avoidant tendencies. There were tendencies to see the novelty and the beauty of the feminine in these communities, which there are so many beautiful women, and an inability and an incapacity, like a not having capacity to actually hold space for multiple women, but wanting to have that experience sexually with multiple people. But the moment that it came to the emotional landscape of that, checking out. Because yes, we want the novelty of the sexual experience with different lovers, but no, we're not as open for the novel experience of their emotional experience and holding space for that for multiple people. So what I felt that I saw in this community when I experienced myself was a lot of opening, a lot of surrendering, a lot of just like big, big love, not really being cared for or nurtured, and a lot of balls being dropped. A lot of people bailing out of things when the grit showed up. And the grit is going to show up whether you're in a monogamous relationship or a polyamorous relationship. The grit appears. And so it felt to me like here you are in these open communities where you're talking about growth and evolution and transcendence. And the moment between your three lovers that the shadow appears and their codependency comes up or their jealousy comes up or your anger comes up about their connection, that moment there's a break. And a lot of people moved away from each other and then moved into other novel experiences that were sexual, and that ecstasy came in. But the moment the grit came up and we could hold space for one another's emotional experience, boom, the energy's gone. And so the reason I think it's important to talk about this is like, I don't believe that living in a conscious community or an unconscious community is better or worse. I'm seeing the delusion in each one, And I'm seeing the lack of integrity in each one. And I'm trying for myself to decide, where do I want to live? Where, in which community do I want to plant roots? Where do I want to sit at the table in a group of people that I feel are willing to show up for both sides of the experience? Because to me, the dark side is not dramatic. And talking about the shadow is not dramatic. And approaching these things when they come up, when lack of integrity comes up, or deception, or betrayal, when we lie, when we cheat, and cheating still happens in polyamorous spaces. That's even more wild to me. We imagine, cheating doesn't happen. It still happens when you make a promise or you create an agreement with somebody, and it's not written in stone, but when there is a handshake on, like, hey, I'm going to consider you and my choices. Like, we're involved now. I'm going to consider you. And this is how I'm going to consider you. And then when it comes to you having an experience that you want and that you desire and that feels very exciting for you, but then all of a sudden those agreements that you've made, you lack the integrity to stop and pause before acting on your desire, to looking at what you've agreed to me, there's disparity here. And we need to talk about that. Because what I'm seeing more and more in these communities that I love, that I want to be a part of, that I still want to have a seat at the table, that I still want to dance with and play with, and these are people I fucking love. I want to say, hey, fucking call each other out. I am called out. I'm being called out right now. Like, this isn't a comfortable conversation. I'm being called, the crazy, emotional, like dramatic bitch that is communicating about her anger towards what she's seeing in community. So if you could call me out, why can I not call you out? Why does everything have to be gentle? Because I feel in these communities, we've become so soft that we can't actually deal with the real pressures of life. We've put ourselves in a golden cage, and everything is, tea and dancing and sex parties and play and authentic relating and all of these things, but we're not actually embodying fully like what it is that we're teaching. We're teaching the will of consent, but we're not actually speaking to it when consent is not given and it's breached. So my desire in putting this out into the world is that I would love to hear personal experiences of those of you that have spoken out and what you have received back that was useful to you and what was not useful. Those of you that have not spoken out and have felt voiceless, and what it's felt to be voiceless and how it's affected your nervous system, how it's affected you socially. I want to hear for those of you that have spoken your voice and how that's affected you positively or negatively. Those of you that are creating ripples, like, how is that showing up in your life fully? How is it affecting you in positive ways and ways that are difficult? Like, I want to find a way to have more uncomfortable conversations, because I feel on the spiritual path, so many of us think that to become more spiritual and to do yoga and to meditate is to like get rid of anger and disagreement and frustration. But that's not what I imagine it to be. I imagine that we have more resources and we gain more grace and learn better communication in order to have these conversations when they come up, so that they don't have to turn into a war, so that it doesn't have to be a battle. And so that the systems that we give power to are built on a stronger foundation. Because when we have key figures like our medicine men and our shamans and our venue owners that are making money on spirituality, and we're all coming together and we're feeding power into these places where there are people running them that are not in their deepest integrity, we are feeding that power. We're putting money into that space and we're giving them their power to have what it is that they desire. And that is a part of the problem. So I am a part of the problem. I don't think that I'm here on my high horse. I don't think that I know better. I don't know what is right and wrong. I just know that what's happening right now doesn't feel good. And when I hear about this behavior from multiple people, it doesn't feel good in my body. When I experience it, it doesn't feel good. When I communicate about it to others and ask for support, the response I get back doesn't feel good. And so all I could say is my body in this moment, from beginning to end, in being in these spaces, I don't feel fully at harmony. And I know that I am not fully in balance either, because I live in these spaces and I see these things and I feel helpless in many ways to what to do to help. And I try to be the peacekeeper, and I've been the good girl, and I have been so loving, and I have held so much space for the men in my life that have had very poor behavior that has created more trauma in my nervous system than I have had to spend years of work doing therapy and psychedelics to heal through myself so that I could show up and just be a decent human. I am trying to leave my relationships better than I found them. I am taking in that rule of camping, in Girl Scouts, where you go out and you leave the campground better than you found it. I am doing my best to do my therapy, to do my work, to communicate with my brothers and sisters, to have conversations that put me in my place, that humble me so that I know when I'm wrong and I take responsibility. And yes, it's too much to expect that we'll all do that, but it's definitely an invitation. It's an initiation. I feel like we're given an opportunity in each relationship to take an initiation. And yeah, maybe sometimes it's not the person you want to take the initiation with. So it's your right to say, I don't want to be with you. I'm not saying that by not choosing a certain connection that you're avoidant, but if it's a consistent tendency to leave your connections the moment that the grit arises, and to leave somebody in emotional turmoil and not hold space for that, and to poke at it actually, and to judge it, where's your work? Like, what about you? Because everybody else can't always be the crazy ones. It can't always be everyone else's fault. Like, what about you? And that's what I'm asking myself constantly. What about me? What could I do better? And so I just want to open a conversation with how we do better as a community, because I'm doing my best as a solo individual in my own cosmic universe that is Echo, but I want to be in relationship to people. And at the moment, my boundaries are so walled in the past few years when it comes to romantic relationships that a lot of times I don't even want to get involved with anybody because I don't feel safe to be involved with people that won't look at their stuff. And I have done that with many men my entire life. But now that I could see it so clearly, there is like a castle wall around me, and I don't want it to be there. I've been told that I have too many boundaries now, that I'm cold and that I'm unreachable. And that's not what I want to be. I don't want to have to cut people off. I don't want to have to cut cords and energy. I want to have uncomfortable conversations. But when people take responsibility and act in integrity and consider one another, we are so wrapped up in our own desire and our own ecstasy and our desire to not suffer and to move into our distractions and the things that bring us pleasure, that in the moments that we are offered the initiation to consider the other people in our lives, we bail. And I feel in this space right now, my brothers and sisters that I've reached out to, it's crickets. Yeah, they're not considering how I'm feeling. Like and maybe they are silently, but the words that I'm getting, they're not considering what an uncomfortable place it is to be in when you make a ripple and you say something that brings up a dark topic that nobody wants to talk about. So how can we be more considerate of each other? How can we be more considerate of how we share space and how we show up in relationship, whether it's intimate, sexual, or platonic? How can we be more considerate of one another? And how can we expand our capacity to hold space for things that are uncomfortable, because we're really good at holding space for the pleasurable things. Like, I see my community, we could dance every night and we could go to some incredible events and just fill our days with like tea parties and lunches and dances and improv contact and all these things. We've got all the time in the world for that pleasure. But the moment the drama comes up, the discomfort, the shadow, crickets. We're tired. The moon is affecting us. The stars, it's too wild in the stars. Astrology says that we need to do this and that now. And I get it. But like, changes are going to happen if we just keep going to sleep and resting when things get difficult. Most change that's happened in history has happened by dynamic force. And sometimes to have peace is to have a disruption. So when we're preaching Shiva and Shakti, destruction and creation, that's like the epitome of the spiritual world. That is like the centrifuge, that understanding that destruction comes with creation. And then we're saying we don't want to talk about the drama and we don't want to get involved in these conversations. It's quite paradoxical and hypocritical, in my opinion. But like I asked myself before I got on this call, like, who am I to say anything? But who am I not to say anything? Same for you. Like, when you think, who am I to say anything? Who are you not to say anything? We need more people to say something.